All right. Today we'd like to welcome Dr. Marlene Millen, internal medicine trained clinical informaticist here at UC San Diego Health. Dr. Millen completed medical school at the University of Virginia School of Medicine and then completed her internal medicine residency training at UC San Diego School of Medicine. She currently serves as Chief Medical Information Officer at UC San Diego Health and also practices clinically as a primary care internist and is also a clinical professor of medicine. Several of her topics of interest and publications include patient-physician communication, EHR usability, and primary care. Welcome, Dr. Millen, and thank you again for joining us here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And thanks for that
So,
nice introduction. I sound important.
yes,
I appreciate it.
oh yes, I'll always try and put together the most interesting, best things. So tell us a bit how you got into clinical informatics.
Well, I've always liked computers, and I actually have dyslexia. And so people who have dyslexia, like writing is hard and doing things kind of the traditional ways. And when I was younger, I'm almost 50, so computers were not how I actually learned to type on a typewriter. But when computers came out, I just remember thinking like, wow, this is cool. There's a lot that these can do for me, like even like a calculator and stuff. So when I was younger, I would always tinker with computers and play with them. But I always wanted to be a doctor. That was my dream. My dream was not to be a computer person, and that was fairly new when I was young. But as I went through medical school and residency, I kept, kind of rubbing up against informatics, doing some research, and we had to do, save all the images, and I had to like learn Unix, just different things that I just enjoyed doing as part of a peripheral thing. It wasn't my main job, but I just had an aptitude for it. And then when I became an attending in 2005, informatics wasn't even a field back then, but I really like process improvement. So I was doing things like writing protocols for refills and just writing standard things for the clinic. And then they started doing our Epic system, right, about a year later. And I got involved in that because I was like, oh, here's cool. Instead of like, written piece of paper, I could put this protocol in a system. And so as part of that, that springboarded a larger interest in informatics, but it was really born out of my love for, using a computer to make my life better and make those around me life better. So it wasn't like I thought it out and figured it out years ago. I just kind of did my natural inclinations to do informatics.
Awesome. Did you have any like programming or any technical computer skills like that in the past?
No, I remember reading Unix for Dummies back in the 1990s. Uh, so no, pretty much all of my informatics skills are self-taught. I used to do web HTML back in the day before they had like ways to do make a website. You had to actually do programming to make a website. They didn't have all these cool programs. So I would help our residency make their website. Um, so I think the bigger thing I did rather than have any formal training at that point, because again, back then we didn't have an informatics fellowship. So I'm very, very jealous of you all who get to do that. Was just paying attention to stuff that was going on and trying to learn about it, and then using tools that I had to teach myself. So books, and back then YouTube wasn't really around either. So asking people who knew how to do it to show me how they were doing it. And then just not being afraid to hack around and figure something out, I think was kind of how I learned most of my skills.
Okay, gotcha. So I guess my other question, how have you seen this clinical informatics change over time? But I guess the real correct question is you've seen it become what it is, become a subject in itself, and then keep evolving. So how kind of have you seen that become?
Yeah, so it kind of happened over time, the field of clinical informatics. And I don't think it was I mean, it feels deliberate now when you look back, but it was kind of an organic growth based on going from paper to computers and not having a lot of medical personnel involved initially. I think that's how we got things that feel like, our clinical systems sometimes feel like they're not made for doctors. They're made for billers and other, you hear that feedback a lot. And I
Mhm.
feel like part of that is because we didn't have this field 20 years ago. We had some pioneers and folks that were doing the work, but not a lot of high clinician folks, so not a lot of people who bridge the gap. So over the last like 20 years, what I've seen is a growth and interest in informatics, and more people talking about it and interested in it. Chief medical information officers didn't really exist back, 20 years ago. We had people who were the ones you went to when you had a computer question, but they weren't really paid for it or trained in it or given the power over the system that were needed to keep it safe and teach. So I think what I've seen is just this growth, and pretty exponential, right, of clinical informatics, and an understanding of the power of informatics too, which in both data and improvements in people's life or worsening of it if used incorrectly, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like there's still a trend just from what I've observed in my first year where things get implemented and then informaticist physicians go back and try and make it usable because they're not developed with usability of physicians and supporting staff really in
Yeah,
mind.
I think the usability is the big word that's probably where my love of informatics came from. Is I like to make things usable. I remember I took a course in college and they made us walk around campus and look for issues like the door that says push when it's really pull, or the handle that doesn't match. And informatics is all about usability, right? If it's made well, nobody even notices, so they're just doing their work. If it's made badly, it can be an impediment and cause harm, at the very least cause burnout. So yeah, so I think a lot of times things are great ideas, but no one's going through the process. And that's the part I really love, is the process of creating something in our system that is usable, as easy as possible, as intuitive as possible. But that's really hard when you have competing interests, for things that go into our system.
Yeah,
So
definitely. It kind of made me think of the update that we recently went through, and one of the biggest, pun intended, one of the biggest things I noticed, and I still always notice, is just really important buttons can be really, really small, and so it's not intuitive, and people are like, well, where's that, or how do I click like submit or refresh, or all those super important things. So
it
like
relies a lot on teaching stuff rather than being able to visually look and quickly see what you need to do, right? So
yeah, that's for sure. So that's kind of my next question is how, like, what have you learned about implementation, and like what advice could you give for us budding informaticists in change management implementation, I guess?
So change management is kind of my specialty. I actually started my job as CMIO without realizing it, accepting it, and we brought on, a whole nother health system onto our instance, within a year. So I had this place that was actually pretty happy with their workflows, and we had to bring them onto our system. So one of the number one things I learned is listening. So before you implement a change, listen to both sides, the people who are trying to implement the change, like what are you actually trying to accomplish, and then listening to the people who are going to experience the change. What are you currently doing? What are you worried about happening with this change? And then trying to get a meeting place between the two. You're always going to have, a perfect world would be everyone would be super happy, like, oh, this is a great change, I'm so excited. Can't wait for it. And so I always try to look for those things that would make people excited for the change. It's not usually the whole thing. For instance, our recent update, the filtering for in-basket I knew would be super popular with the nursing staff. And so, they're gonna have to learn a whole new button structure and stuff. And so I really, reviewed with them the new changes, as well as just went over like the positives, and they were super excited. In fact, I think if that had gotten delayed in any way, I might have had a riot on my hands. But the providers and other staff weren't as excited because they didn't see as much benefit. But just at least going over like why we were doing the change and listening. A lot of times I can't change something, but listening when people have an issue, I think is really important. And then sometimes I could make a change. They were like, oh, this thing, and I'm like, you know what, that's a great idea. Let's go ahead and do it. And then I also give them feedback right away. So if you're doing change management and people are giving you feedback, it's really, really important that you listen, but also reflect back or let them know if that change was taken or not taken and why. I think that builds a lot of trust as you go through your years. You want people to come to you when there's an issue, and you want people to to listen and work with you. And if you just are always shoving things down people's throat, like, I don't care, it has to be done, then you're not going to get a good teamwork atmosphere, because this, no clinical informaticist can do it alone. You need to be working with operations and your leaders and your staff and your teams. So I think the biggest thing is listening and giving feedback.
Gotcha. That's good advice. Kind of stemming off that, something that Dr. Siddipati was mentioning yesterday as well is important in leadership and change management is conflict resolution. So what's your best advice on that from a leadership perspective?
You can't see it because this is a podcast, but I'm laughing. Conflict resolution is something I actually hate conflict. I actually had to teach myself. I'm kind of a passive person in general, and a lot of people who like computers are too, because I prefer to use a computer rather than call someone. So I'm not as into the conflict, but I'm a primary care doctor by practice, and I have learned over the years in my field, if I don't speak up and interact in a way that is assertive when I need to, bad things can happen. And I think in informatics, that's important to realize also. So it's not that you have to like get in someone's face and get back at them, but you also have to be firm if something needs to happen a certain way, and is important to resolve. So meeting with uncomfortable situations, I've had to do it a lot now over the last few years. And the one thing I try to do is I try to, number one, leave emotions at the door. So make sure I'm well fed, I've slept well, I've eaten a great
Get to your
breakfast.
best baseline that you can
Be
get.
my best baseline I can get. If I'm super stressed and I know I have to have a hard conflict meeting or situation, I've even been known to put them off for a day if it can happen. And then really, just like I mentioned before, listening first. When you have a big conflict, it's about hearing what the issue is. And sometimes, in my head, I'm like, I can't really fix this or deal with this in the way that they want. But then I ask them, I'm always like, what can I do to help with this situation? I don't think I can fix exactly what you're asking for, but what is it that would help you? And sometimes they don't know, they just need to, vent or things. But a lot of times it's between two groups, the group A wants this and group B wants this. And sometimes I have to bring in, I've even gotten to the point where I've had to bring in lawyers, because it's a compliance issue. Like, that's nice. I like that you want your staff to do this, but it's not compliant to have your staff do this. So I think a lot of it is just figuring out the right path. And it might not be the first time you deal with the conflict. It might be the third or fourth time. So I also don't always try to resolve it right away. I had one conflict that took 3.5 years to solve, but it was solved eventually, and everyone's happy with the outcome. So I think that's the other thing too, is unless it's an emergency, time does start to change the view of things. So, but yeah, definitely if anyone is interested in that, taking courses in conflict resolution, even a short course or a leadership course is really useful. That's what I did, and it was really helpful for me.
Okay, that's what Dr. Siddipati said as well. Like recommended
the nice part to say is you're not born with this skill, by the way. It is taught. You can learn it. So if anyone like me who used to get run over with issues, and now I'm like, no, this is how it has to be, and people still like me at the end of the day. I think it's stuff I learned, multiple courses over time.
Gotcha. That's a really good takeaway. And I like what you said. The very first thing that you said before you even talked about really your experience was looking inward and knowing that you're a passive person at baseline. So if you ask someone the opposite question and they're like a more assertive person, I feel like assessing yourself and how you go about things is helpful for us. That like I can't take a conflict resolution course tomorrow, but I know that I'm passive, and I think like something that could make me feel like, oh, I'm being too assertive or too aggressive for someone else that's aggressive, or just in the real world is really just what you have to do,
Yeah,
I feel like that's useful.
I think the opposite is true too, right? If you're a very assertive person, you might have to dial that down.
Exactly. Yeah.
So And I don't know which way is easier, being more passive or more assertive, but I definitely think either way, I've never met anyone that didn't learn something from working on conflict, CEOs, everyone. So I think it's part of life. And, one quick tip is if you've ever worked the service industry, you can certainly go back to those skills. That I use my service industry skills where I was a cashier and a waitress for years. So
Nice, nice. Um, so that was one of my actually is becoming one of my favorite questions, even though it just came up yesterday. I don't think it was even on the list. Um, so I guess
well, it's a
another,
great question. So I think our job
oh,
is a lot of conflict. So
yeah,
good.
I'll add that to everyone's list for these
Great.
interviews. Um, I guess kind of moving forward into the primary care space, um, what are some strengths and weaknesses you've seen within ambulatory informatics work and kind of some changes or things that you hope will change or have seen change?
I think one of the interesting things in ambulatory work um, is that it's so varied. Like every area is doing things differently. And as an informaticist and a person who likes order, it's kind of fun when you go out and you see all the different ways to do the same thing. And the hard part for a system when you've got people checking in patients differently, asking different questions, wanting different questionnaires done, different follow-up patterns, different ways of scheduling patients. All of those things, number one, create a more fun, and I use the word fun in quotes, system to maintain because you've got a lot of variability. And then it creates a lot of frustration both on providers and patients when you've got, areas in ambulatory that are so disparate in the same system. And what that means is like you've got, staff that floats around or docs that work in different clinics, and it's a lot of mental load to keep track of what you're supposed to do in certain areas. The hospital doesn't have it much better, but at least there's a lot more standardization, order sets or order sets. You can be on the fourth floor and you'll have the same order set as you have on the second floor. Whereas in different contexts and clinics, at least in our system, you'll have different views, different orders, different things. So I think that's one of the negatives. I haven't figured out how to fix that yet, and I don't know that it necessarily needs to be fixed, but one thing I've been doing in all the areas is trying to make it a little bit more uniform as we go and do updates. I think about making things a little closer to foundation level build. One of the bad things when you've had a computer system for 15 years is there's a lot of homegrown hacking too. So making that improved. But I think variability is probably the one positive and negative in ambulatory areas. Creates a lot of issues.
Gotcha. Um, and how much clinical time do you have per week currently?
So right now I'm down to 3 4-hour sessions a week, so about 12 hours. Through the course of doing informatics, I've I've done, up to almost full-time clinic, which in academic settings is 8, and then more recently down to half-time, which is 4. So I just cut down recently as I took on a full CMIO role. A lot of informaticists don't do as much clinic. Number one, I love clinic, I love being a doctor. So I've always tried to do a little more than a lot of leads in areas. And number two, I'm primary care. Primary care, even if I don't see the patients, I end up doing the work. So might as well have some appointments to put them in. But I also, because I'm a chief medical information officer, I also want to know how the system's working. And I feel like I have to be pretty clinically active to do that. I don't want to be one of the leaders that, oh, I haven't been in the system in 3 weeks and there's oh, this is really annoying. So I want to be around the people that are using the system too. I feel like it's, first of all, it's fun. And number two, it makes it more meaningful as a leader.
Gotcha. Definitely. So that kind of so about half clinical and then half dedicated informatics time. So how do you kind of juggle between clinic, especially being in primary care where the in basket's always open, um, and then going to meetings and all the different things that you do?
Yeah, so first of all, it's hard. And I think if you ask me that question on different days, I'll give you different answers. But I would say it's that is probably one of the bigger struggles, not just for people in my position, but in any medical field and administrative or academic jobs, right? Because you've got, and don't forget email. I mean, I think between email, patient messages, meetings, family life, all the different parts. I think one thing is trying to be flexible. And again, going back to the conflict resolution, take care of yourself, make sure you eat well, sleep well. Sleep is always a priority now for me. Years ago, it wasn't. I would stay up till midnight working on stuff. And now I'm getting older and realize, what, I'm going to die at some point. Let's at least make sure I'm well rested before that happens.
There you go.
But I do a lot more scheduling. I live by my Outlook calendar, and I've been known to schedule in time to do patient work, especially like a Monday after a holiday. I'll make sure I've scheduled an hour or two just to make sure I'm not getting divided attention. I also learned along maybe about 10 years ago, finally, not to do two things at once, to really focus on what I'm doing, whether it be a meeting. You'll rarely see me in a meeting where I'm not paying attention. If I can do a meeting where I'm not paying attention, I shouldn't be on that meeting. That meeting is not mission critical for myself. So I can send a delegate or just have them give me an update afterwards. And the same thing with patient care. So I'll set aside usually 30 minutes in the morning and 30 minutes in the afternoon to do my in-basket. Sometimes I don't need the whole time. Sometimes I need a few minutes more. I have a pretty active practice, and my nurse knows how to reach me either through secure chat or text, but knows not to bug me unless it's something also that needs to be done urgently for some reason. Luckily in ambulatory, there's not too much urgent, right? But I think the bigger thing for me is I've just learned to organize my time and be efficient and do the task in front of me and not jump around. I definitely probably am one of the undiagnosed people with ADD, as I love pinging from thing to thing, but then I don't finish anything. So I've learned to turn off notifications. I have very few things that pop up in my face. If they do, they're urgent. So I think that's one key, is figuring out your style and shifting it over time. Don't stick to the same thing every year. There's going to be new tools and new things you can use to help yourself.
Okay, that's really good advice. I feel like it's easy to get alert fatigue from emails, in basket, Outlook calendar, and trying to jump back and forth. As I definitely haven't struggled with that
Yeah,
for
I used to
sure.
do that, honestly. I used to have my Epic in basket open and then my email, and then I'd be like, ooh, that email looks more interesting than what I'm doing. Let me
I
read
was
that.
doing that like an hour ago. Yeah, it wasn't very
Yes.
efficient.
And I was also taught to try to look at something once. And so that's why it's important to set aside time. If you're just quickly looking through your email or your in basket and you really don't have time to deal with the question, then you're going to look at it twice. And that's a bit of a waste of time. So as long as it's not urgent, like, the whole system's down, in which case, yes, I drop what I'm doing. But if it's most things can be kind of done on a time where you can actually concentrate on it. And I think that's the important thing. I don't do work while watching TV anymore like I used to and wonder why it was taking me 2 hours to do something. It's because I was watching the show and not the work.
That's really good advice. Doing something just once. I like that.
Yeah.
And then I kind of asked about juggling hats within work, but what about how you prioritize when you're not working and being present for wellness with your family and whatever you like to do out of work? How do you, because in-basket email, all this stuff can always be pinging. What do you do to kind of separate your wellness from work?
Yeah. So I think that's also something. In fact, I've started helping and teach in medical school because I don't feel like we do enough of that. Everything's 24/7, right? Emails coming in at night.
Hmm.
My results are coming in at night. When I first started 15 years ago, it would be a paper printout on my desk, and email was pretty minimal at that time. So I think the work has increased exponentially, but no one's teaching anyone how to deal with it. And you see a lot of burnout right now because people feel like they're on all the time. Um, Luckily, over the last couple of years, again, not all the time, I've learned to compartmentalize better. And by that, I mean, not ignoring everything, but just being like, letting it go. Like I try to get as much as I can done during clinic time. I still have some charts to finish, which I hate. I like to have them all done, but I needed to spend a little extra time with a patient yesterday, and I figured, you know what, I'm going to do that, and then I'll take care of the charts when I can in the next 24 hours. But I think the bigger thing I do is when I get home, if I need to spend a few more minutes finishing something, I'll tell my family, go finish it, and then I'll come out and spend time with them right away. Like I don't do like dragging it through. I watched my latest episode of Andor last night. Great show if you haven't seen it. um, and I was totally present and watching it. I knew I had a bunch of stuff to do. The world wasn't going to end if I didn't get to it. And then this morning, after I had breakfast and my coffee and checked on, all the kids, then I got started at work because I work from home today. But I didn't do it as soon as I woke up. I made sure I, enjoyed my morning, checked the news, did what I needed to. Because in the past, I used to spend all day working and all I did was burn myself out. It's not like it made a difference anywhere. I didn't make more money. I didn't get more accolades. I didn't get more attention. I didn't even get raises when I started getting more, CMIO positions and things like that, that's actually when I started changing things, interestingly, where I was more present and more exact on what I was doing rather than morphing into 20 hours of work a day. So I feel like that taught me to be more concise, even though I'm talking a lot right now, more concise and more thinking about what the question is and the answer. So that quick action helped me be a better leader, I think, too. So I don't think anyone's going to get there tomorrow on what is going to be best for them. But I really think when I get home, I'm not working all weekend. I'm not working all night. I set aside time to work on papers. I schedule it and I do it. And I am a big procrastinator, so it doesn't mean that I don't sometimes be like, I don't feel like doing it. But I do try to think about what I need to accomplish and then schedule it and do it. And then if I don't want to do it for some reason, I decide, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to let that go. I'm not going to get that done. So
Gotcha.
long
So
answer, but
no,
important, I think.
I think that was super valuable, just compartmentalizing your time and focusing on what you're doing and being present. I think that's useful for not just even informaticists, like I think new physicians, us fresh out of
Especially new
residency, and
physicians. Yeah.
because I know I was reading a study in the UK, and the highest burnout was amongst like people in their 20s and 30s who just finished, and I wasn't really sure why I didn't comment, but I think that would play a part, is that we don't know how to manage all this stuff, and we've only known it one way with everything's 24-hour accessibility, and not really
Yeah.
knowing how to turn ourselves off. So I think that everything you said is really helpful.
I do think too, thinking about what you just said, is that as part of training, we're in school all day, studying all night. So we're kind of used to devoting all our time to this field, right? For years and years and years, right? Residency, same thing. I think I did start teaching myself in residency when I had a day off. I would literally go lay by the pool in the shade and take a nap and go to the beach and do things that recharged myself. So I think also growing up having to do like jobs after school and sports, I would just go till 11 o'clock at night every day, right? You're just used to it. So learning to find what recharges yourself, I think, is not a skill that anyone teaches you or celebrates, right? You're like, oh, you're not as productive, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, the
No,
guilt factor.
yeah, the guilt factor of like taking time to do something, like it's even called a guilty pleasure. I'm like,
Yeah.
it's just having fun. It's fine. So I think that's one of the disservices we do through the medical training is we don't teach people. I think they're trying to, but it still doesn't feel right. Trying to teach people just to have a life. It's okay. Nothing. I mean, I remember I took off 24 hours to go to my grandmother's funeral during residency. And I'm like, in retrospect, I'm like, that was stupid. Why didn't I take 3 days to go be with my family and make up the time or do whatever I needed to? So I think some younger folks are figuring that out, but we're not letting them figure it out too. So I think it's on us as, me as a leader to make sure my folks below that are coming up are learning to take care of themselves. But I encourage everyone to find what their guilty pleasure is and not make it guilty anymore.
Oh, I
Mine
love
is
that.
baseball. I got season tickets to baseball. I went and saw Padres games. I read romance novels on the weekend and I go hiking, just fun things that make you who you are. So
Definitely. Well, I think everything you said would be valuable for them to hear. So once this is live, you can send them this podcast as well if you feel like it.
yes, I'll send it out to all my folks I work with.
Yeah, there we go.
Save myself
Um,
from repeating it.
yeah, like if you're not
See,
paying attention,
efficient.
you can
See,
listen later. Yeah.
already.
On like listen double time too. So then it's half the time.
I talk too fast for that, I think.
I kind of pivoting from burnout and things like that, want to talk about some of the work that you've done within the EHR and kind of how it's come to be. So I know recently we've implemented the MyChart billing for patient messages. Can you talk a little bit about how that started and kind of where you see it going and how it's going here?
Yeah, so my chart billing, so first of all, patient portal messages started like over 10 years ago. And I remember when it came out, I'm like, we're going to charge patients for this, right? And our leadership was like, no, it's going to decrease phone calls. And we give it, no, more messages, more phone calls. And the messages often got routed right to the provider, the physician or the nurse practitioner, and didn't get any filtering. Whereas the phone call, someone would call, put it in a little template, send it to the right team. So there was a big difference when portal messages started in the amount of work for folks. And ever since then, I've done things like create protocols for the staff and the patient, handouts like this is what you're not supposed to do and don't. And so when CMS came out about 2 years ago, I think it was right as the pandemic was starting, the rules about billing for my chart, I was very excited. Unfortunately, they required a verbal consent. And I was like, well, that's stupid. So you're getting a patient portal message, and then you have to call the patient to see if it's okay to bill them. So we did look in starting the billing a few years ago, but I realized the extra work involved in calling the patients or getting a consent from them was just not
Going to
reasonable.
become a telephone visit in
Yeah, it was
itself.
going to become a telephone visit. And back then we couldn't even bill for telephone visits. They did add telephone visit billing codes. Um, but I was just like, you know what, we looked at different ways, actually did almost the whole build for it. And then we decided to hold off because it was just going to frustrate people. So recently though, UCSF, one of our UC partners, kind of figured out a workaround that our compliance and billing team agreed with, which was just kind of putting a pop-up message when people send a billing. We also had new legal and compliance team. And for any of you informaticists out there, make sure you be friends with your compliance and legal teams because, having them work with you to vet new products and things are really important to keep them legal and keep you out of trouble. And so I reviewed with the billing and legal and compliance team what UCSF was doing, and they were like, "Oh, okay, that's good enough." I'm like, "Oh, thank God." so we put this little statement in front of all the MyChart messages, and the rest of it's actually pretty straightforward. We added a billing section to our MyChart messages and two smart phrases: one to send back to the patient with the structure that would make it a billing visit, as well as a note in the system that would kind of document how much time. It still takes about 30 seconds to a minute to do, but we can include that time in billing. So we've done, we just put it in a few months ago and we've done over 1,000. They've been paid by insurance. People are doing projects and research in them. But I think it's a way of taking, so this all starts with a CMS billing guideline, Centers for Medicaid Services, and paying attention. Because I'll tell you, our billing team didn't mention this. It was me knowing the updates on CMS guidelines that involves, things like telemedicine and telephone visits, and then pushing our different teams to do the work. You may be lucky enough if you work in a place where they have folks monitoring and then coming to you with those things, and then I would definitely always be open to it. But I think it's been a win, at least in that looking at time that we're spending outside of an office visit in the ambulatory areas and getting credit for it. And some of our areas are really embracing it and using it, and some of our less. And I'm actually going to start targeting it. I'm actually at 11:30 today making a video on how to do it, a quick video, because tip sheets aren't for everyone, a little explanatory 1.5 minute video that they can watch to kind of see how to do it. It's pretty straightforward once you do one, but just like I mentioned earlier, sometimes the intuitiveness isn't always there. So I'm pretty excited for that particular project.
Nice. I bet the video will be helpful too. Do you know how many health systems have gone live with this? Or is it like what if you had a rough percentage idea? Is it common
I
or no?
don't. Yeah, a lot of people were using, patient driven. There was a patient driven one, meaning like I'm the patient, I'm going to send a message and I can choose to make it a billable visit. And guess what? People didn't use those. Not too many yet are using the provider driven, meaning the patient sends the message and I make a decision to make it billable. Um, so I think right now I'd say maybe 5 or 10% based on at least the folks I've interacted with. The good news is like UCSF really shared their information out. And a lot of people are using it as a template to do. And it's helping because, when a big UC is like, hey, we can consent doing it this way, then the others follow behind. And I think it
Hmm.
also helps nationally for CMS to say, okay, well, this is a standard of consent process for this type of billing. And it helps us all when we kind of work together.
Gotcha. Well, that's awesome to be on the kind of on the cusp of this, which it makes sense if you have to think and review a bunch of stuff that your time should be paid for too for that.
Yeah, and it's a shift in how we think about medicine too. And the pandemic kind of helped with that shift, right? A lot of us went to video. We went to video in a weekend. There's a publication that we did about our shift uh, that's available. But the bigger thing I think that the pandemic did is it showed that you can perform different types of medicine and still give good care. You still have to have your guidelines, still have to kind of I had a person on the phone yesterday who didn't want to come in person because she had a bad headache. And she's on the phone, she starts describing her knee. I'm like, the knee doesn't seem urgent and I cannot do an exam on a telephone call. So, how about we do that in person? If it hurts worse, go to the urgent care. But, the nice part is she got some of the care that she needed because we have these new billable codes. So instead of her just completely canceling an appointment and not getting any care, I was able to help her with her couple of issues that she needed. So I think this really embracing and understanding how billing codes change and how we can utilize them to help with our patients is important. And that's part of informatics too. So
Yeah, definitely. Kind of creative use of the newer ways we can provide care. It's interesting.
yes.
Another tool or a kind of change I've seen, or an email yesterday was with the gender identity now in the storyboard. What other tools, and I saw you're interested and have experience with gender affirming care as well. So what kind of epic tools um, do you foresee or are in the works that you know of in
So
this
yeah,
space?
so we're in California and we have a gender X now too. So we have non-binary legal gender. So I think one of the big things I'm doing right now is helping with the lab. So interestingly, it's really easy for me to change the system. But keep in mind a lot of lab values are based on, male and female
Mm-hmm.
uh, sex. I'll say sex at birth to make it easier. Um, but so for our side on the informatics, it's actually not hard to make a lot of changes to really help with patients who are transgender or non-binary. But the reality is in medicine, some of the stuff is sex-based, and so a lot of the work we're doing right now is just having stakeholder meetings and reviewing where we can change things or show both ranges or that part. So interestingly, that's the hardest part. Some of the other areas that we've been working on is preferred name. A lot of patients have a preferred name, whether or not you're transgender or not. And definitely, updating to legal name is pretty straightforward, but some people have a preferred overall name. So we made our system easier to do that. And then interestingly, one simple thing that we had done was, the dot ID or dot, the little phrases that you can use to say this is a 25-year-old, you know, female, male, or, we were able to update those to reflect what a patient prefers. And that was really nice. Before it would say, 24-year-old patient, and that's even worse because then you're not even So we did all that in the last year, and then more recently we were able to update to gender identity on our main site, so that when you're logging into a patient, you can see immediately what a patient identifies as to help make them more comfortable. And there's a lot of accolades on that, but I'm kind of sad that it took us as long as we did to do that. It took a lot of approvals and a lot of process, but I think it's really important to make our patients feel comfortable and make our staff know how to care for our patients better. So
Yeah,
it's been really well received. So thanks for bringing that up.
yeah, definitely. I think it's really impressive and kind of makes me proud to be in a health system that's kind of on the cusp of that. Do you know if a lot of other health systems are doing that amongst
I
the
think,
country?
yeah, I think in California for sure. Around the country, I think it's varied. Depending on where you are. Unfortunately, right now, gender affirming care is under attack in some states, so that makes it harder.
Hmm.
But I think in the states where they are able to do that, they are making the changes. But California, it's been mandated, and UCOP also, our center, our university. So the nice part is I can do it in my system, but they're also requiring it in our billing systems and other systems, which is great. So we're working on that also.
Gotcha, gotcha. Well, that is exciting. Let me look, see if I think you've covered a lot of the other questions I had without me asking them, ironically. Let me see if there's anything specifically. I guess what's your best piece of advice for a resident thinking about going into informatics, and then also for a current fellow? So these are probably two different questions, I guess.
So yeah, so for folks thinking about going into informatics, if it's if you're just starting to think about it, just reach out to any informatics persons already at your institution, and just ask to. We're very friendly. I think most of us. I have lunch with people pretty regularly that are interested. Reach out and show the interest. We love sharing what we do, as you can hear. So I don't think it'd be shy. And then also as you're if medical student, resident, there's informatics all around us. So it's very easy to kind of think about what you're doing, and looking at QI projects with doctors you work with, team. Most systems have, like Epic has something called Slice or Dicer. You can go in and look at it and look at data. Just the same kind of thing I used to do, which is just look at the informatics around me and make it part of my life. Um, and then, ask for mentors. There's nothing wrong. I mean, I think the one thing I did wrong is I didn't reach out for mentors. And now when people reach out to me to help mentor them, I also protect my time. But, if I can't do it, I help them find a mentor. But I think mentoring is also really important too, because they can help you with, hey, you're interested in this project? Here, I know these people working on this. Let me get you over there. And then apply. And then, yeah, for folks that are already in informatics, same thing. I mean, make sure you work, and you have to be proactive sometimes, right? Scott, we get busy. It's not we forget about you. We know you're there, but you're like, hey, I'm really interested in that, and I've tried to be more inclusive, but it's still hard. There's always rapid movement of stuff. So just inserting yourself, if something's too sensitive for you to be on it, then they'll let you know. But otherwise, just be like, hey, can I join that? Hey, can I do that? Hey, and I hate that it has to be that way right now, but because it's such a new field, we don't have an exact pathway. So I think it's a lot of self-driven interest, and I'm hoping over the years it'll become more of a here's what you do pathway. But for right now, it is a bit more self-driven, unfortunately.
Yeah, definitely proactive and mentorship are huge for both of those.
Yes. And let us assign you projects.
Seek and you shall find.
Yes.
So the last thing we usually end with is a pro tip. So any useful like piece of technology or something that's helpful for wellness we talked about, or a book, app, podcast, anything like that that you have recently been very interested in that you find that other people should know about.
It was funny. I was telling my husband, I was like, this is the hardest question. Because so first of all, I like learning about everything. So I think not even a pro, app or anything. It's just a tip is don't let your curiosity die. You know, I'm always curious about everything and, I use different inputs. So I like Reddit. I don't know how many folks still do Reddit, but it's anonymous, but there's all kinds of great discussions on there. There's a medicine subreddit. Sometimes it gets a little whiny, but there's sometimes EMR threads on there that are really like interesting to see what people think. And I like the anonymity because people not for me. I don't really care if people know who I am, but people are more honest a lot of times about how they feel about stuff. And I always love new tech. I like new tools and new cool things. So I like looking at what's coming out. So I do a lot of trying stuff out. There's something new. Like I don't always have the latest. I still have my original iPod from
Oh,
20
nice.
years ago because it's 20 gigabytes and it works. What the heck? I got tons of music on it. So not throwing out the old just because there's some new thing too, I think is the other pro tip I would have is pick and choose the things that make your life better and make you learn more. And for me, it's just, kind of having a couple things I like to do that are relaxing to me, but I also learn a lot from them. So
Awesome. Well, I never thought of looking at Reddit for EMR health system informatics stuff. So that's
I don't do it on purpose, but I come across it. Like I
yeah.
like looking at all kinds of stuff. They have a romance Reddit that has great suggestions for books and San Diego sub, so I can read about like cool stuff happening in San Diego. And I'm on the Reddit Padres one all the time. Can we complain about the players or celebrate when we need to? So for me, I love hanging out on there a little bit. So because it's relaxing, but I always feel like I'm learning something new. Like, so I think surround yourself with information and people that you enjoy and you learn from is probably a good thing, good way to kind of look at stuff. And social media can be bad, but it's also like I'm on Twitter. I think if you just look up Marlene Millen, I'm the only one on there. I'm not very hard to find, but we'll see what happens with Twitter. But I like Twitter too, because I can see people in Hong Kong and around the world and what they're doing and informatics and different.
Informatics Twitter is big,
It's
which makes
big.
sense because computers,
Yeah.
but
But it's also about sharing information in a useful way. Like lots of
Mhm.
junk isn't going to be that useful, but a new article that's cool. I don't have time to curate and find stuff, but I like to use social media to kind of help keep me connected in a way that I just don't have the time or energy to do otherwise. Like there's no way I can read through, all the journals. I have the summaries coming, and so I'll read the titles. But even then, I'm like, oh, but when I get it in a time when I'm relaxed and reading, I'm able to like click on it and read the link. And self promotion of people too is great on there, so you can kind of learn. In fact, we've got some of our best employees from Twitter. They saw me on there and they inquired, and I posted a job, that kind of stuff. So, but just using social media, I think, for your advantage and not letting it. I don't care about how many followers I have or things like that. I'm more about like learning for myself.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's a good like all-encompassing social media, Reddit, Twitter, using it
yes,
for good and for
yes.
your
For
job in a way.
I should make up tutorials next. No, just kidding. No, but
Um,
actually, I was gonna say one thing about social media is I've learned to use the way that people like to see information to teach stuff, right? Bites of info, um, to update people. Uh, and, I think that makes a difference when you're talking about new things in informatics. No one wants to read a dissertation anymore. I don't. So a short chunk of information and then telling them where to go for more is kind of how I do things now. And I've noticed a big positive feedback on that.
like the
So
Twitter character limit.
yeah, the Twitter character limit.
I've never been a fan of long emails as well. I have to come back at you and give a pro tip as well. Sometimes there's multiple co-hosts and everybody gives one. Um, so my pro tip, I did this the podcast yesterday, and so I had to think of another one. Like you said, it was like took me longer than I'd like to admit to think of what to say now because I had to think of a new one. But my last one was a self-cleaning litter box that you only have to change once a month, which has been amazing. So that kind of expensive, but I think it pays itself off. Um, so that's what I said yesterday. So then my new one is the Healthy Planet Index and Social Vulnerability Index. Just
Those are
kind of
great.
yeah. So I've gotten kind of looked at both of those for projects the past year and learning how HPI is only in California, but then SVI is within the whole country. And so just kind of for the digital determinants of health, which I've been reading up on lately, kind of for other fellows or listeners to kind of look at what tools you have in your that are embedded within your EHR to look at all these different demographics and how they're kind of stratified. It's a really interesting, useful tool for all this moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great pro tip, Scott, because that's how I started doing stuff years ago before I was CMIO, is just playing around with our databases. And once I figured out the zip code thing, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And then you can
Yeah,
get, yeah, you can get your income levels and things like that from other databases too. So it's really eye-opening sometimes to start playing with the data. By the way, you should create a data table of how much time you're saving with your self-cleaning litter box.
oh, I mean, easily 20 minutes a week, if not more, just
Oh yeah,
because I don't have to like dump it, walk to the trash can, like or the dumpster in my apartment complex and all of that. I just put it in there. It takes like less than 5 minutes once a month. Doesn't
nice.
smell. It's comes in an Amazon
Now I want to
package.
get a cat just so I can experience that.
Yeah, I mean, I wish they work for dogs, but that'd probably be too good to be true.
Yes.
But well, thank you for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it. Um,
Yeah,
anything
how are you
else?
doing?
Final words for the listeners.
No, I think mainly have fun with your jobs. We are lucky to be in a time when there's so much change and cool stuff going on. It can be overwhelming. I think it's really important to go back to, trying to help people, trying to enjoy what you do every day, and take time for yourself. So life is short, and we're all gonna get to the end at some point. So enjoying the ride, I think, is really, really kind of the key. I mean, not partying every day, but just finding joy in what you do.
Definitely. All right. Well, thank you, and I will probably talk to you soon in one Zoom or another.
Yes, sir. Okay, thanks, Scott. Have a
All
great
right.
day. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks.